Hi everyone! In today's video, I figured you all could follow along as I make little mushroom sculptures for the garden out of polymer clay. Now that spring's here for me, I really wanted to create something that would go well with all the new growth and bright colors outside. I started with a sketch trying to figure out what style I wanted to go for with these. I debated on doing little mushrooms with faces or just keeping it simple and going somewhat realistic. I did land on the more realistic but still whimsical style, adding a mushroom house to the mix. I really enjoy woodland or forest themes, so I was super excited to see how these would turn out. I then began the sculpting process, starting out with aluminum foil to get the basic shape. I created these in two parts, so I started with the base and then I would make the cap of the mushroom. And for the base, it was simply creating a cylindrical shape with a flat base and a rounded top, keeping it small. That way I could make sure the sculptures could hide amongst the plants when it was completed. I then rolled out some clay, covering that aluminum foil base I had created, and started to smooth it out. Then I created the cap, and it was the same sort of idea where I started with the aluminum foil, but for this I pushed the foil in, creating sort of a concave effect. I kept holding the cap up against the base of the mushroom, trying to gauge what size the cap would end up being. I did this continuously throughout the project, making sure the shape and the size matched up well. I had to go back a few times and add more clay to the cap, trying to not only enlarge it, but also get more of a natural appearance. It's easy to try and get these types of things to be perfectly round with smooth edges. However, by doing so, I feel like it never comes out looking realistic, in my opinion. And that's because nature is full of imperfections and it's all organic shapes. So with the cap, I would leave the bumps and I would create waves on the outside edges, trying to make it seem as natural as possible. Once I was done sculpting each part, it was time to connect them. To do this, I took a small piece of wire. It's called Armature Wire, and I stuck one end into the base and then the other end into the cap. I also added bacon bond to act as a glue to really make sure the pieces would stick together once they were baked. And while that was in the oven, I then got started on the little mushroom house that you saw in the sketch. If I'm honest, I wasn't entirely sure how to start off this part of the sculpture. I knew I wanted a hollow base, but I didn't really know what the best way was to make sure that it was supported. So I just went with straight up clay, and it worked out really well. I simply sculpted out an arch shape, but I made sure to also leave clay on what would have been the back side of the wall to enclose it. It was a lot of working the clay with my hands until I got the shape I wanted, but trial and error is really the best way I seem to learn on how to make things look the way I want them to. I promise, you just gotta take breaks and keep pushing through because eventually you'll get there. Once I smoothed down the base, I threw it in the oven. That way I could build on top of it without smushing or ruining the structure that I just worked so hard to create. And with building it up, I really focused on building the top of the base. Next was working on the cap, which it was the same process as the more simple mushroom, just larger. I began with the aluminum foil, then added the clay, and after I smoothed it out, I left some of those imperfections to try and keep it natural. However, this cap I feel like is a great example of how sometimes my first attempt does not come out the way I want it to. It wasn't super realistic looking, it was too round, too inorganic in shape, and just not the right size. So I really had to go back and rework it to get it to where I liked it. Once I did, I added only bacon bond to stick the cap and base together. I didn't add any wire. Off camera, I created another little mushroom just because it would have been repeating the same exact process as the first one. But here are all of them coming out of the oven. I went ahead and I added a few coats of primer to each one as well. That way the acrylic would stick and the colors would really pop. Then I began painting. I went with red, yellow, and orange for the colors of the caps. I felt like these colors really complement each other and aren't super unrealistic looking. I also added some brown and white, which I planned on using for the base color. I started with a base coat of the cap colors and added about 3 layers of those, and then I went on to color the actual mushroom base, which I mixed as a light beige or tan color. For the base, I started with a wash where I watered down the paint quite a bit just to get a light layer of paint down. Then I progressively darkened up the color. Each time I varied the shade slightly, just trying to get a lot of different subtle hues in there. By the time I was at the end of adding the small streaks of color, I was really building up a lot of texture, which I'm a big fan of with painting. I also added a very, very light wash of a darker brown onto the top of the caps with the bright colors. However, it's hardly noticeable. I did this to try and add some variation, that way that they didn't look too flat. But again, you can't really see it on camera. It kind of just muted the colors slightly. And finally, I added the little dots to each, which needed a few layers as well, but really they pulled the painting together. And with that, here's the final results. I really hope you guys enjoyed the video today. I had a lot of fun creating these, and I'm so happy with how they turned out. They really turned out how I was envisioning them myself. If you did enjoy this, then stick around to see what's next.